Hi, everyone. So my name is Kristen, and I'm the curator for the Arctic Voices Gallery at Science World, British Columbia. This is one of the virtual discussions we'll be having here at Science World. We'll be learning from different scientists, researchers, and peoples about the Arctic, or in this case, the subarctic. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Science World is located on the traditional, unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh village site of Squanok. I'm currently presenting on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Hunkaminam and Squamish-speaking peoples. As Brian mentioned in the chat, this presentation will be recorded in a webinar format, but you're able to actually share some of your comments in the chat, or if you have questions, please use the question and answer function. We ask that you keep your comments relevant to what is being discussed. During this presentation, we'll be also asking for audience participation. So we'll be putting up some polls for you to vote on. Brian will be our co-host, and he'll be helping with the polls and monitoring the chat for questions throughout our presentation. I'd like to also do a shout out to Science World because today is Science World's birthday. Science World is actually turning 32 today, so happy birthday, Science World. For today's presentation, we have two guest speakers who will be telling us some stories about Churchill, Manitoba, and I'd like to introduce the speakers, Alex Berg and Stephanie Puleo. Why don't we begin with Alex, and she could tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi there, my name is Alex Berg. I'm from Churchill, Manitoba. Churchill is located on Treaty 5 land, the traditional territory of Cree, Dene, Inuit, and the homeland of Métis. I'm very excited to be sharing the stories through Zoom, as oral history has been a way of the Cree people communicating their stories and their history. So I'm very excited to be taking part today.
Awesome. And then we have Stephanie Puleo.
Hi, everyone. My name is Stephanie Puleo, and I'm leaving my video off just for the moment because my internet is a little bit slow. I'm calling in from the unceded Kwakwaka'wakw territory of the Quatsino people and their ancestors. So that is near Port Hardy on the northern end of Vancouver Island. Very
awesome.
Happy to be here today.
Yeah, welcome. So let's begin the presentation because I'm excited to hear some of these stories in Churchill, Manitoba.
Okay, just to get started, I had put this slide in because originally Steph had approached me to do this talk. She mentioned how we brought a unique point to this presentation as she has traveled from BC to Manitoba, specifically Churchill, and then has gone back, and I have done the vice versa. So I've grown up in Churchill and I moved to BC, Victoria specifically for a little bit, and now I'm back in Churchill. So I thought it would be really intriguing to do so the top left photo is where Churchill is located in Manitoba. So you can tell that we're very north part of Manitoba. I just included a map of BC. Obviously, you guys know where you are. But I kind of wanted to just talk about with Stephanie the differences and challenges we may have experienced, just noting different cultures and different things as we traveled between BC and Manitoba. So for me personally, I definitely noticed that the trees were a lot bigger. For example, if you notice the bottom middle photo, this is currently what a Churchill tree looks like. So it was very intriguing to go to Cathedral Grove and see the massive trees that were very mossy and very full of life rather than our not so full of life trees. So yeah, we definitely have a couple comparisons to give. Also on the bottom right is our weather currently today in Churchill, Manitoba. It has been snowing for the last week. It's currently -1 today. So we were definitely on the way to work, going through some snowdrifts. And I'll let Steph talk about the bottom left photo and your guys' balmy weather. So
hi, everyone. Yeah, so the bottom left corner is what it looks like around my house today. And yeah, just to copy what Alex said, I grew up mostly in the lower mainland, where I was used to big giant trees and, you know, lots of greenery. and not a lot of snow, not a lot of cold weather. So it was a big change. Moving to Churchill, I got there in the month of April, so very similar time to what Alex is talking about right now, that she had to drive through snowdrifts between her commute to work. I don't know if I even really knew what a snowdrift was. That's how little I knew about snow and winter. I can share a little bit about the Churchill tree that you see in the middle image. A couple of things that you can sort of notice in comparison to our BC trees in the other corner, top right corner. So if you notice, a lot of branches are mostly on one side, up near the top of the tree. So a common name that we like to say in Churchill is the flag tree. So if you picture a flag blowing in the wind, and all of the branches on this tree are kind of mostly pointing in that one direction. And so that's because on the opposite side, we have a predominant amount of wind coming from this one side, and with the wind, it's picking up little bits of dirt and dust, and it's basically like an abrasion zone. And prevents those little tiny tree little needles from growing very big or growing at all. You'll also notice a very sort of defined abrasion zone. Once you move down from the top of the tree, you can sort of see a little section where there's like virtually nothing. So when we were just talking with about Alex's commute to work and having to drive through snowdrifts. So basically what happens is, if you can imagine, if we were looking at that same tree in the winter, the snow is basically covering the lower portion of the tree. And so you can actually see all the way around the bottom of the tree, there is green, quite lush branches. And so we call that the tree skirt. And basically that tree skirt has actually been protected by the snow in the winter because it's covered. And then just right where you see the abrasion zone is where the snow level has basically stopped, and where the wind and pelting snow and bits of dust and dirt are sort of hitting that particular tree.
Question from Jade: how cold is it there? So it's probably for Alex. How cold is it right now in Churchill?
I believe it's only like -1 right now, but it's the perfect time to snow still. So we've had snow for the last week, so we've probably averaged about between 0 to -5. So we're hoping for the balmy summer weather soon.
And you did mention spring is hopefully coming out there.
Around the corner, yes. There's the signs of springs. We have the seagulls and the geese have returned, so hopefully shortly we'll experience some summer. So
yeah, seasons really change when you move up north. Well, actually, if you change any kind of latitudes, I guess. All right, so this next slide, we actually have 4 separate images that I think we are going to launch a poll, and you guys can select an image, and we will talk more about that particular image. So we're just waiting to see the poll results, but it's looking like we have a lot of people voting for polar bears. Definitely a big part of living in Churchill.
I want to know about these polar bears. What is going on here? A polar bear lift.
So Steph can probably talk as to why the polar bears stick around during this time. But this is what we call the polar bear lift, or some businesses will call it the pizza delivery, depending on what the code word is. But what it is a few times a year during the closer to the end of the polar bear season, in the end of November, What happens is the troubled polar bears, so the polar bears who are coming into town often, or they're breaking into cabins or causing conservation grief, what happens is they get darted and put into, so the bottom right photo is our polar bear holding facility. And they typically spend 30 days in this facility. And then once the ice starts to freeze, what they do is they four-wheeler the polar bears out of the facility into sort of, you can kind of see in some of the top photos, the net. And then from there, they secure the net around the polar bear and hook up the helicopter. And then from there, they take them further north. So the idea is that they're relocating these polar bears from potentially a dangerous environment of them being in town, and they're relocating them to northern point of Churchill so that they're able to just head out onto the ice from there. So my favorite is the bottom left photo though, because you can kind of see all of the buses line up. This is definitely a huge event in Churchill. It's definitely, you got to get there quick. It happens really quick. You got to get there to get a good spot, and it's definitely an adventure to see.
I just noticed a question coming up about teaching humans to stop leaving garbage out. The town actually does a lot of really great work to make sure that polar bears are not attracted to town. They have one of the, I think, quote unquote, but I think it could be true, the only polar bear friendly garbage dump. So it is a drive-through garbage dump that is locked off, it is staffed, and it is the cleanest place you could imagine almost. So you go through and you recycle, you do all of your dropping off of your garbage, and that way no bears are being attracted into town. So if you look back at Churchill's history, they did used to have an open air garbage dump, which did attract polar bears. So they have gone through the process to adjust that. There's also a lot of education provided to the community on how best to interact and sort of avoid those human polar bear interactions. So with this program, it is run through conservation, Manitoba Conservation, and they do have regions or zones. So the whole town of Churchill has kind of got a main core, and in that area, the conservation officers are actively trying to push the polar bears out of that area, keep them out of that zone. And then there's kind of an in-between zone where they might observe a polar bear that is getting close to town or heading towards town, but they might try to direct it by honking their horn and pushing it towards the open tundra area. But that said, there are some polar bears that have previously somehow engaged with humans, and once they've sort of learned or sort of had some sort of maybe a reward, they've gotten some food or some garbage, that's where there can be some issues. So in other parts of the country, unfortunately, with conservation, they do have programs where animals are not able to be relocated the way they can be with polar bears in Canada. So with this program, they are attempting to keep these polar bears safe by removing them from the human populated areas.
There was one other quick question on this section. If you're in Churchill around mid-October, any other wildlife you might expect to see?
There is so much wildlife. I think that was one of the things that I just was so amazed with living there throughout the year. So I lived in Churchill for 3.5 years, and October is such a great month to be able to see how things change. Like we were talking a little bit earlier about seasons, and in October you can really get a sense of sort of the end of fall straight through to like you're getting into winter season. Well, for me, BC winter is like, it felt like winter by the end of October. But yeah, there's lots of birds, like snowy owls. There's Arctic hare. There's fox, so Arctic fox, but also red fox. And there's red fox with different hair colors, so you can see the silver fox or the cross fox. Sometimes at the beginning of October you can see beluga whales still, but they've headed out because they don't want to get trapped in the sea ice.
You can usually see like seals around that time too, like when the ice is like, if we have a cold winter, you can sometimes see seals out on like the very far bay on the ice, taunting the polar bears along the way. So
all right, once again a chance to pick anything but bears, murals, Aurora, trucks. Each leads to a story of life in Churchill. Oh my goodness, it's coming. The votes are moving so quickly. There's interest in the Aurora.
So I think one of the things that I found really neat about the Aurora, here we're going to talk about the prime Aurora season in the winter. But one thing that I found really neat moving up there was that Churchill gets Aurora something like over 300 nights of the year. There's Aurora activity happening all the time. The reason why we have an Aurora season in the winter is because that's when you can actually observe it with your human eyes. Because in the summer, we have such long days in Churchill and very short nights that are still bright. You don't really get the dark nights that you can't see the Aurora at those other times of year. So there's also fall and spring where it might get cloudy, blizzardy. So that winter time is really such an amazing time to get to see.
Yeah, and the rest of the part that kind of happens for like community-wise during March. So tourists do flood in for the February, March. However, the community does love this time as it's our Aurora Winterfest. So it's a week to 2 weeks long. It's kind of like after our winter, it's like the start of the warm up. So it's not minus 50 anymore. So that brings out a lot of people. We had riders from Thompson and some from Churchill participating in coming up, and I don't know how, but they hit a jump and they are in the air doing tricks on their machines, which was more than amazing to see. But it also includes some of our King and Queen Trapper events, snowmobile racings, and the big kick is the Hudson Bay Quest, where mushers on dog sled will go from Churchill to Gillam or Gillam to Churchill, depending on the year. So approximately Gillam is 272 kilometers away from Churchill, so it's quite a trek for our mushers to be prepping and preparing for this big quest that they go on. So it's quite a treat for Churchill after our long winters.
Excellent. I'm going to move us forward because I know there's some interesting things about the Northern Studies Centre that you can share with us.
Yeah, so as you can see on the photo to the left, it's kind of hard to see, but Churchill is at the very point of onto the far left there. And then the Churchill Northern Studies Centre is actually located 23 kilometers outside of town. So when I talk about having to do a commute to town and hitting snowdrifts along the way, it is kind of a vast drive to do. The mandate of the Churchill Northern Studies Centre is to understand and sustain the North. So it was founded in 1976, and it's an independent nonprofit research station or field station focused on subarctic research. So we do a lot of like learning vacations, as well as we support researchers when they come up, and school groups, and we're located in an area that allows the researchers to do a lot of the research without the human influence of interrupting their studies. So we're able to provide accommodations, meals, transportation. We have skidoos and stuff available to rent. So the photo on the right is actually our building that sits just outside of town.
So one of the things I think when I first moved up to Churchill, I started working at the study center. I think within like 3 or 4 days of moving there. So it was quite the experience. I had applied before I moved there. I had my interview like the first full day that I was in Churchill, second interview the next day, and then the next day I had the call that said, do you want to be on the staff ride tomorrow morning? It departs at 7 a.m. I think. Is that right? 7 a.m.? It's pretty
Yes.
early. And so, you know, we drove out to the study center, and then here I see this beautiful new building. So this building is LEED certified. So that's leadership in environmental energy design. Is that what it stands for?
Yep.
Hopefully I got that right. Now, it's kind of interesting, even with that they were hoping to get a certain level of LEED. I believe it was LEED Gold design, but through the process of the certification, they achieved just one lower, and it was because of a few points. LEED certification is an international certification, and you know, some of the things they have set up as the point values, you know, they're sort of looking at it not necessarily from a remote northern perspective. So one of the areas I remember was being able to use locally sourced building materials. Well, if you saw in our picture earlier with the Churchill tree, you know, the building materials that are available close by are not necessarily usable. So Churchill did utilize a Manitoba architecture firm to build this building, and they did use some Manitoba sourced building supplies. They also did a really neat integrated design, utilizing input from researchers, from students and staff that use the building to make sure that they sort of got it right, you know, before they started building. So yes, it's really beautiful, amazing building, and you can take a Google tour, 360 tour. You can sort of move yourself through the building. So I encourage people to follow up and give that a try. There's
a question about what kinds of research does the study center do? What kinds of projects are people involved in?
So many. One that is a neat opportunity for general public to get involved is with Earthwatch. So Earthwatch is a citizen scientist program. It runs around the world, and the study center does have Earthwatch expeditions at different times of the year, and they're working on tree line tundra studies. So in the summertime, you're working in these really neat ephemeral ponds that you know, I think they're looking at soil composition and all sorts of things. Here, as we're clicking through some photos, we're seeing polar bears. We definitely have polar bear scientists that come up. We have scientists that study frogs. So kind of a unique thing. Churchill, in terms of where it is at the edge of the Arctic, there are some animals that maybe this is the, you know, around the southern limit, like a polar bear, it's around the southern edge of where they might travel. But then it's also at the northern edge for some animals. So as a frog is a good example of something that you go a little bit further into Nunavut and you're not going to see frogs, but you can still find them in Churchill. So people, scientists like to look at how things are doing right on that edge, and see how things are responding. So foxes, that's another big one. One of our board members does research on foxes, wildflowers, insects. The list goes on. lots of bird researchers.
Pretty much everything that you can see in Churchill gets studied at the Churchill Northern Studies Centre. One of the things that I found interesting, though, was how some of the researchers use photography for their science, and being able to post it and have Arctic bears, I believe, is one of them, and beluga bits. They use photos to like identify certain polar bears and identify certain, they set up wildlife game cameras to be able to identify what traffic is going through there, and they're able to share their research upon other people who say a fox went through there, so they're able to share with them as well. So it's kind of neat to see or start to learn some of the research that goes on at the center. I kind of just wanted to touch on some of the Quincy photos that you can see there. So the middle photo where they're peering in, and the bottom right there. So even though we're in a pandemic right now, we're very limited as to how many travelers are allowed to come up to Churchill. Right now, we're actually in a state of red where we're not allowed, it's essential travel only. So our science team has been keeping up with their Quincy skills. To my understanding, I haven't built one yet personally, but the Quincy is more of like a pile of snow that then eventually gets hollowed out. So our staff has been brushing up their skills, ready to teach all of our learning vacations as once they are able to come back and visit us. So, this is kind of like the fun portion of like Churchill and what the experiences are. So I'm really excited for this part.
So again, if you want to take about 20 seconds to put your votes in there, we've got pictures from swimming goats, people in a chair being pulled around, summertime sunshine. Oh, it's a closer vote back and forth. We've got about 10 seconds left here on the polling. It is definitely neck and neck a little bit. I'll let you know, goats are a strong contender. Good job, goats. All right, and we're going to end the polling and share the results. It looks like, the chair ride, just by a hair.
The chair ride is, it's kind of a hard one to explain. So what we call it now is the couch-a-tick. And what it is, it's a comatic that my spouse has put reclining chairs on. So a comatic is used when people like the rangers, or if you're traveling to a cabin, it's used as like a sled to be able to attach, like if you're moving a skidoo or if you're moving coolers or whatever you may be traveling with, that you're able to strap it to your comatic and travel with it. But we've taken a new twist on it, and we've added, strapped down some chairs, and the photo that we have there is actually from Christmas Day. So it's a bunch of us just lounging in the chairs, getting dragged around by a skidoo on Goose Creek. So it's one of my favorite pastimes to do, and I just love the couch-a-tick experience. But I've included a couple other ones as well. So I've included the other adventuring things that you get to do in Churchill. So the one on the far left is dog sledding. Dog sledding for me is the most exciting experience in Churchill. Yes, we have polar bears. Yes, there's belugas around, but these dogs are the hype of it all. Like, they are, from when you get there, hearing their excitement, having them come and like leash up, to them being finally able to take off again, like they're excited through the whole way, and it just creates such an exciting experience. And I'll let Steph talk about the middle photo, just because this is usually another transportation in Churchill that's very unusual to other people. So
yeah, so I'll just add that comatic, it was a new piece of vocabulary for me moving from BC to Churchill. I had never seen one. I do not think I knew what it was. But, you know, it is such an important piece of equipment used for most of the year through Churchill. So basically, it's like a sled that people pull behind their sleds, their skidoos or snowmobiles. And, you know, there's even small versions like kick sleds that people, when you go to buy your groceries, you know, if you're walking back home, you know, people pull a sled behind them with their groceries on this little sled. Like, these are things I did not know about. So yeah, and maybe just a quick note about the sled rides with the dogs as well. You know, such again, a neat experience to be in the yard with the dogs. They're so excited to get going. And then that moment that they take off, they they just go silent. They're running. They're so focused. So this middle picture is of a side-by-side, which this was actually one of my vehicles to get out and experience a little bit more of Churchill, of the Churchill surrounding area. So that's one thing. There's some old trails that are taking you off-road and really provides an opportunity to see more than just what you can see on a regular vehicle road. Getting out in the summer, those long summer days, it's a great chance to get out and see a bit more outside of the town.
Thanks, Stephanie. There's a couple of fun questions that have come up here. They're wondering, Christmas Day, what is the temperature like?
Oh, I don't remember what it was, but it's definitely like between -20 to -30. I believe that day we went because it was a warmer Christmas than usual. Typically, it can be probably, I'm going to say -30 to -40. So it was definitely a nice winter. It did us wonders. So we were definitely able to get out more on the skidoo than past years. But yeah.
Someone else was curious, if these look to be pre-COVID pictures, like all unmasked. Are you still able to do some of these activities with COVID cautions?
Right now, Manitoba has the restriction of you can't be in an indoor, private property, indoor or outdoors, but they do have the ability to be on a public property outdoor. So probably some of these photos would be okay, but yeah, this was definitely before COVID was a big thing. So
someone was just wondering, what time does it get dark right now?
We're actually blessed right now. It doesn't get dark until probably about like 7 o'clock now, whereas in the winter time, it's definitely 4 p.m., sometimes 3:30, the sun is down. So now we're kind of getting into the extended time. So the summer, not that the sun doesn't go down, but it remains bright probably most of the evening, right until midnight, even further. So we're getting kind of into that portion of it. So probably about 7 p.m. it starts to get dark here currently.
There were a few questions from earlier around the bears and the bear lift. People just reiterating in terms of bear care, like even down in the southern areas, being cautious with your garbage, like not attracting bears that way. Questions are, have there been attacks from bears? Is there a danger there? Like what are the things that are done to keep the bears safe for the lifts, or what are the needs for the lift?
So I don't know. I'll let Alex maybe talk about this as well, but I'll just say, as someone who was a newcomer to the area, it was something that I was, very concerned about and worried about when I first moved there. Manitoba Conservation does offer, I think in conjunction with Parks Canada, but they do these sort of educational sessions for people who are new or for temporary workers that are moving up to Churchill, maybe for tourism seasons, where they will talk you through what are some of the best practices if you encounter a bear. So, first thing is knowing where bears are, what's their habitat. We very much in Churchill know that, this is a polar bear habitat. It's their migratory area. And so we are, as humans, are there. We are the visitors, and it's their habitat. So we want to be as respectful as possible. So if you're going out in certain areas, you need to have that right amount of education to know what to expect. And so if you see a bear, you can, depending on how the bear is acting, maybe, but you acknowledge that you are a human, that you are going to sort of remove yourself. If the bear doesn't see you, maybe you're going to remove yourself from the area. There's a lot you can do to avoid human interaction with polar bears. That said, right before I moved there, there was an interaction with human polar bear interaction. And so it was really top of mind about making sure that we were safe in the streets. I don't know. Alex, growing up, what was it like as, I found this really interesting too, as the amount of education that goes into kids. Like I remember looking out my window and seeing kids playing in the street, and as a new person being like, what if a polar bear comes around the corner? And, but, even that, it's like, it's easier for kids to play where you can see around. Like that was something I had to learn when I open my door in the morning, that I'm not just running out the door and not paying attention to my surroundings, that I'm opening the door, looking, the way you park your vehicle, you're making sure that, there might not be a polar bear, behind your vehicle. You look for paws, that kind of thing. Actually, another thing with the study center and the way the building is built, it's actually built with polar bears in mind as well. So the doors have windows on them that are leading to the exterior. There's some guardrails so that, again, if you open the door, you would be able to visually see. A bear can't be hiding or not hiding, but close by and sort of surprise you.
Thanks, Stephanie. Alex, did you have anything to add?
To me, this is a funny question because growing up, I didn't know what wasn't normal living with polar bears and what I guess isn't normal for a lot of people. So growing up with polar bears, it's kind of like this, you're obviously taught about it in school, in Halloween, they gave you this feel of like, don't dress up as a beluga whale and don't dress up as a seal, or the funny little jokes about that. And during Halloween, they do have like the police around, they have the EMS, RCMP, conservation, and it is a joint community effort to make sure that the kids are safe during the polar bear season. But I don't think at one point that I was ever concerned about, I don't know, there's always been like the close interactions. I haven't personally had a close interaction, so maybe that's why I'm still so, but yeah, as Stephanie mentioned, like you grow up knowing these things that you're just always looking around and you're always aware and you're aware of your surroundings, and that's just becomes a way of life here. Like to me, that seems like a very normal thing to just be aware of your surroundings. So I always find this a very funny question of, because I as a kid, I didn't know that was not normal. And I remember when I moved to Winnipeg for the first time, which is just a bit of southern Manitoba, anytime I heard a helicopter, like it was my instinct to look up and check like for a polar bear, because that's just was the normal. So it's strange to me to think that this was polar bear protection when really it was just my everyday. So it's neat to hear.
A few people had asked, is there a special name for the longest day of winter? Is there anything that it's called up in Churchill, or just in regular solstice day? Or?
I just giggle because we have the longest day of winter and the longest day of sunlight and things like that, but it just doesn't seem like it in Churchill. We always seem to be a little bit behind. So, for example, it's supposed to be spring right now. We're supposed to have flowers and yada, 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 whereas we still have snow. So it just, to me growing up, it wasn't we didn't pay attention to those kind of things just because it doesn't apply to us. So maybe Steph has a better answer than I do. So.
No, I think, maybe again, earlier someone was talking about, what are the signs of spring? And I always thought of when I first moved, I couldn't tell because I'd never been to Churchill before, what was tundra or land and what was sea ice and ocean. Like it just looked the same to me. It was all white. So without this prior context, I didn't know what was land or ocean. So one of the signs of spring, or as you're waiting or it's approaching, was seeing this little tiny strip of blue, bright, beautiful blue, of the open ocean, the open Arctic Ocean, of Hudson Bay. And basically that's what they call the flow edge. And as the tides are changing, the weather is changing, you get beautiful sunny days, the wind is blowing, that flow edge changes where it is. And so sometimes you see the beach and it's, a bunch of sea ice has, pushed up onto the beach and the open ocean is quite close. And then, you know, it can be a few days later and, oh, it's just all sea ice again. So that's kind of a neat thing, you know, to observe.
Oh, it's a beautiful image to leave us with. Any last thoughts, anyone? There was one last question here. Has a polar bear ever actually appeared at Halloween?
Oh, yes.
No.
Lots
Okay.
of bears at Halloween. That's actually like prime season.
It's in the middle of polar bear season, so it definitely is. I feel like, I don't know, I feel like it's hard to say because there's probably definitely a lot of polar bears around, but conservation and RCMP and the EMS do such a great job to make sure that the kids are safe in town. So there's probably been a couple experiences that they would be able to tell you about, but they do a pretty good job at keeping it a minimum. So.
Well, thank you both for sharing your experiences. Kristen, did you want to jump back in and share anything more?
No, I just wanted to thank Alex and Stephanie for joining us today. It's amazing stories from Churchill. I wish we could probably talk like 2 hours longer about all the different things that are happening out there. And I want to thank everyone else who's joined us today. So it's been amazing to have these kind of virtual speaker series. So definitely stay tuned for stuff that we are going to be presenting in the next couple of months, and make sure to check out Science World's website just to get some of the updated events that are going on. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks. I don't know if we have one more minute. I just saw one last question that said about if we know if there's more or less polar bears in the area.
Yeah.
And I can just sort of add a little bit of an answer towards that, and that at least when I was there, so that's going back a few years now, but the Churchill population of polar bears was pretty steady, pretty similar. But one thing that the scientists were noticing, you know, maybe Alex has some perspective on this as well. Like as a resident, I definitely noticed this, just that when you see the mom a female with cubs, that going back in time, it was more common to see a female with 2-3 cubs, something like that. And then while I was living there and sort of near the end, the scientists were saying like they're seeing a lot more female with 1 cub. So cubs need to stay with the female for quite a long time compared to other animals. They spend a whole year learning how to hunt, and so they need that to be able to survive. And they're sort of seeing that the survival rate of cubs seems to be decreasing.
Yeah, I just wanted to add in one last thing. Churchill is the polar bear capital of the world. So it is what we thrive on. It is the industry. Tourism is what keeps Churchill together. And so there is definitely a mutual respect between community and bears and how we manage them. And as Stephanie said, the dump used to be just an open area. So we continue to work to live together in this remote community and remote area on the Hudson Bay. So it's interesting every day of what we can experience and move forward with. So
Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for your questions. And yeah, we look forward to seeing you at future Arctic Voices events. Bye.